Well, thank you very much, Michael, for that very kind introduction, and thanks to my old friends at Lowy for this platform, which is a great platform, and more broadly for the relationship that I've had with you all over many years. I really do find the work I do with the Lowy Institute as a visiting fellow and the connections I have and the discussions I have with my Lowy colleagues some of the most stimulating that I have, and many of the ideas, for better or for worse, many of the ideas in my quarterly essay have been sharpened in that debate, and the debate is continuing. Those of you who know the Lowy blog, The Interpreter, will see that debate between me and some of my Lowy colleagues and some others developing over the next little while. And of course, many others in the Institute are doing a lot of work in some of the issues that I'm working on, the work that Rory Medcalf is doing with the MacArthur Foundation, for example, the terrific paper that a group of Lowy colleagues put together, Power and Choice, which I think is one of the really best things that summarises these issues. It's a very significant factor. And I'd also just like to say that if the format of the quarterly essay had allowed one this kind of indulgence, I would have said something about the contribution that the Lowy family and their generosity in funding this institute and the activities that take place in it, the contribution they've made to my capacity to work on these issues. So during the election campaign, some of my Lowy colleagues and I spent a bit of time, as a lot of other people did, complaining about the lack of foreign policy content in the election campaign. And we could have talked about why there wasn't more and what we could do to stimulate more. My hunch was, amongst other things, amongst the several reasons you could identify, was that the big questions, particularly the questions about the US and China and Asia's future that Michael has framed for me so nicely, are not quite ready for consumption at the table of public and political debate. You can't serve these issues quite raw. You can't march up to the table and say, US, China, that's a huge issue. What are we going to do about it? You can't start the public debate at that point. You've got to sort of slice and dice it a bit more, and so the chopsticks of public debate can pick the pieces up and chew them. And I mean, for example, it's always hard to acknowledge that you've got a problem. It's always hard in public debate to start talking about a problem until you've got at least some idea of what the solution might be. Because to throw a problem on the table in public debate as a politician and say, I've got no idea what we're going to do about this, is not a good political look. So there's a chicken and egg problem. And I think here we've been, the question of the rise of China, the way in which we see our future relationship with China, the way we see our future relationship with the United States, the way we see both of those things influencing Asia, is too big and as yet, or has been hitherto, too raw, too uncooked for the public debate to really get a handle on it. And so for institutions like this one, and for all of us in the public policy debate, the foreign policy debate, we do have a task. It is the task of policy, can I use this horrible word, policy intellectuals, to try and do that cooking, to try and chop the issue up, and to the point where the public debate can start to get its hands around it. And I think that's at least what I'm trying to do here. It's not a bad time to start. It comes at the end, I think, of a pretty serious decade of denial. During the 1990s, we began quite an interesting debate about what China's rise meant. But of course, what China's rise meant in the 1990s, even at the end of the 1990s, was a different thing from what it means today. At the end of the 1990s, nobody I spoke to, entertained in their mind as an active possibility the possibility that China would actually overtake the United States to become the biggest economy in the world within time frames that are relevant to the sorts of public policy debates we have today. In the last couple of years, for example, in a 2009 Defence White Paper published by the Rudd government last year, that was accepted as a clear possibility. This is something which could easily happen within our lifetimes, and certainly within the policy timeframes that are relevant to the choices we're now making. So the shape of the debate has changed over those 10 years. But I think in the last decade, two ideas have come to have too big a role in the way we've thought about these things. They've made it too easy for us to evade serious, sustained contemplation of the questions.